Hey everybody, it's Nancy Shenker, the geezerproofer, here for another episode about how to be a badass after 50. And today I've totally hit the trifecta because my date is Jack Skates, who, believe it or not, I met on Facebook. And why is it the trifecta? Because the podcast is about life, sex, and tech after 50. So the focus today is going to be primarily on tech, but Jack did just write a book about dating after 50 or even younger, and he'll share the details with you later. But now let's just jump into the conversation. And thank you, Jack, for appearing on the podcast, The Geezerproofer.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nancy. It's good to be here.
Terrific. And one of the things that attracted me to your profile on Facebook was the fact that you're one of the other few people I've met over 50, who really is at the epicenter of the technology and AI boom. And something that I'm really, really passionate about at the age of 67 is that technology is not something to be feared. We didn't really grow up with it. I grew up in the era of rotary dial phones and fax machines and mimeograph machines and things that Gen Z doesn't even know what they are. Going to the library to do research in the Dewey Decimal System as opposed to Google. And the technology world just kind of crept up and then accelerated. And now here we are in 2023, almost 2024, finding ourselves in this world where almost everything is automated and people walk around with earbuds in 24/7 and on their phones. So it's always great for me to talk to somebody else from the analog era who is now just totally entrenched in the digital world. So how did you first get started on your technology journey?
Well, I used to work in nightclubs in Los Angeles, and I had a stepmother who was very computer savvy who gave me my first computer. And when I got into that was probably in the early 90s. And I started using it to do things like print menus and flyers and stuff like that. But then I got online and started meeting hackers and other people and doing these bulletin board conversations, which led me to my first experience going on AOL when it first came online.
I was going to ask, was it AOL or CompuServe
this was
Prodigy?
Before AOL, yeah.
Did you have a Commodore computer? Or
No, it was actually one of the very first generation laptops. So it was a gigantic plastic box that had a tiny little screen on it.
Love that.
And so that's how I got started. And then when I discovered the internet, I got very obsessed with the web and thought the web was going to really take off. So I started one of the first web agencies in Los Angeles in 1994. And we had a lot of success. It was in the beginning, nobody came, and then eventually we really hit. And by 1996, we had to unlist our phone number because we were so busy. And then I moved to San Francisco, where I basically started over as a developer, and then I went into consulting, and then I've now done tech consulting all over the world. I've worked in 15 countries for the 5 largest banks, a lot of brands that people are familiar with. So
it's always funny for like Gen Z, all of you Gen Z listeners out there, now all you need to do is go on to Wix or WordPress or Squarespace or Shopify. And if you have some graphic design talent, you could build your own website. But back then in the 1990s, you really had to be a programmer. Build a website.
You had to learn HTML to make anything happen. So it always starts with like printing out hello world. So you write hello world within these tags, and then you see it on the browser for the first time. And it dawned on me, everybody around the world could see this message I just typed. And that's what really set me off. And that kind of led me down this path. And I started off as pretty much a developer, but then I got into user experience, and that's sort of been the foundation for a lot of my work for probably the last 2 decades.
Yeah, and I always laugh when I hear the term user experience because everything theoretically should be the user experience. You're building a website so that somebody can go on and learn about what you do and find what they want to buy. So if you're not delivering a user experience, then what's the point? It's all ultimately about the user.
Yeah, I think for us, it was about making a good user experience, right? And that usually started with foundationally understanding your target audience. So who are the people that you are going to be serving with this technology, and understanding even their language, because a lot of companies back then spoke in their own corporate lingo. They organized their websites around their departments, and customers don't understand all that because they don't have that kind of insight. So it was very confusing. So that sort of led to the birth of user experience, of really understanding the user so you can label things in their language, organize it in the way that they think about it.
Which is a great segue to what I wanted to talk about next, is that we as consumers over 50, forget about the business to business side of the equation, just as everyday people, obviously we've gotten very dependent on our smartphones to find ice cream near me, or to look up a phone number, or to make an appointment, or to obviously to chat with our friends. But what are some other uses of current generation technology that really can benefit people over 50?
I think a lot of the things that you mentioned are important. I think having access to services, having things like for example, I have a One Medical subscription, so I can actually message with my doctor through the app, which is really nice. It has all of my health records, my pharmacy, everything that I would need to look at, like blood test, is all in one app. So I think that's probably a really helpful thing for me from a healthcare perspective. When I started sort of my own sort of better health journey at the beginning of this year, and lost 35 pounds since the first of the year. And I used my Apple Watch a lot to track my exercise. I was also tracking things like ECG, and all of that goes into Apple Health. So when I go to see my doctor, I literally just hand her my phone, and she can see like all of this history that would have never come out of a casual conversation that I would normally have with a doctor.
Yeah, and I use my Aura Ring to see how I've slept every night, and to think about, well, I didn't sleep as well last night because I had alcohol within 2 hours of going to sleep, or I stayed up watching Law and Order SVU, and that's why my sleep pattern was not as good as it should have been. But other than health, you and I talked a little bit about Internet of Things, IoT, and and a lot of people are very paranoid about having a device in their home because they feel like it's listening in. But what are some of the positive convenience and lifestyle benefits of having an IoT device?
Well, I think like in my home, it always freaks people out when they come to my place for the first time. People my age, when I have to say, Alexa, turn on the lights. And everyone rolls their eyes. They're like, Alexa can turn on your lights? And I said, it can turn on my lights. It can dim my lights. I can even change the color of all my lights. And I didn't have to install anything because all of the light bulbs are Wi-Fi enabled. I have a little Hue router that talks to all of the bulbs. And then I have an app that's also integrated with Alexa. So I can control all of the things, all the lights in my house. And when I go to bed, I can make sure all the lights are off. Or when I leave, I don't have to worry about any lights being on. So I think that's been super helpful. I think, probably not yet, but a big advantage is going to be personalized robots, things that can basically do some very fundamental things for you around the house.
Well, look at Roombas. I mean, you could basically have a robot vacuum your house. And I always use that category as a good example when people say, oh, I don't believe in technology, or there's too much technology. I say, well, people used to go from cleaning their floors with a mop. It was hand powered. And would you give up your vacuum cleaner? Because that was the next evolution of floor cleaning.
Right.
And now it's the Roomba, where you don't even have to touch the vacuum to get your floor cleaned. I also use my Alexa to maintain my grocery list. And
I do the exact same thing. Yeah, add to list.
I have one in my car, and I'll be driving and remember that I'm running low on cashew milk, and I'll just say, Alexa, add cashew milk to grocery list. And when I go to the store, it's automatically on the list already. So time saving, convenience, things that you're just too tired or lazy to do by hand.
Yeah, exactly. Like even in my kitchen, I primarily use the one in my kitchen for adding to my shopping list, but I also use it to do things like, if I want to roast some beets in an air fryer, it usually can tell me what the around temperature and time should be for that. I think when Alexa becomes AI enabled, which is definitely in the works and happening soon, it's going to be a whole new ball game, right? Because you can basically say, I want a recipe for 5 people that are coming over, and I want to make this dish.
And here are the ingredients I have in my cabinet. What can I do with it? So instead of spending an hour trolling recipes online, your robot assistant, it reminds me of Hazel and the Jetsons.
Right, exactly.
And she now exists, but she exists in the form of this little device on your countertop. You and I talked also a little bit about socialization and community. And I often tell the story about how I bought my mother a tablet against her will when she was 94. But once she realized that she could use it to see family pictures and keep on top of what her grandchildren were doing, it really, I think, helped her get through a very lonely period in life during the pandemic. So I really believe that socialization, although a lot of people talk about technology and how it can distance us, it can also bring us together.
Well, I think anybody who's a digital immigrant, which almost everybody our age and even younger is, which means you did not grow up with this technology. You didn't intuitively know how to use it. If you did know how to type, it's because you took a typing class in high school, right? So, for people like that, a computer is a very intimidating thing. It's complicated. It has this keyboard. You don't know how to type on it. But when tablets came along, it just by its nature made everything more approachable because you could touch, you didn't have to use a mouse and a keyboard. And so I think there were a bunch of people that were kind of originally left out in that digital revolution got to come back to it by making like these really simple experiences for people that didn't have to learn all that complexity.
Yeah, and my biggest piece of advice to listeners who are over 50 and may have missed a technology memo or two is just to find somebody who's patient, who understands that it's not your first language, who'll teach you how to use it. And there are more and more of us over 50 who also grew up without any of this stuff and have kind of mastered it and tend to be as patient, if not more patient, than some of the younger people who, even my own daughters, will sometimes roll my eyes when I ask them how to do something because they grew up doing it, but it's no different from speaking a foreign language and having to find somebody to teach you how to speak it.
It's interesting how it evolves because when I got into computers, and it started becoming a big part of my career, my mom became curious. And because she had access to me, I was able to help her get a computer, learn how to use it. And she got very savvy and she was on the internet. For somebody her age, it was very early adopting. But I did notice that like as she got older and as she got more towards the end of life, it was less about the computer, it was more about her phone. Because everything was right there, right? It was mostly a communication tool. She wasn't really using it so much for creation. Like I do design work. And so sometimes I have to create like really big things. I have a big screen. It's still a complicated world for my work perspective. But from a life perspective, if I didn't do that for a living, I can't imagine why I would still own a computer.
Yeah, I mean, you could do so much now on a tablet or on the small screen. I happen to have my laptop in the trunk of my car because when I'm writing and I need to see a 2-page spread, I need the big screen, but I could still do like 98% of what I need to do on my phone. We were talking about Canva earlier, which is it's like the color forms of our generation. Even if you have no graphic capability, if you can imagine something, you can build it in Canva, Canva.
It's amazing because it has all these really well-designed templates. Like there have been templates have been around forever, but they usually were pay to play, and the better they were, the more expensive they were. But Canva just has like an endless library and all you have to do is put in a subject and you'll see hundreds of variations. Like one of those will definitely work for you.
And it now has an AI, Shutterstock, which is a stock photo library, and Canva both have AI functionality built in.
Right, yeah, with Magic Studio, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's great because you can write a prompt. I mean, let's segue now into AI. So, you and I have talked about this. Artificial intelligence is, yes, at some point, if left unmonitored, AI could become our robot overlords. But right now, it's really not. It's a tool to help you do your job and live your life better. And we were just talking about how last night I was kind of grumpy and bored, and I was just playing around, and I went into one of the AI photo apps, and I gave myself Technicolor hair. Or you could turn yourself into a pinup girl, or something that's been really popular lately is people reimagining themselves in their high school yearbook.
High school yearbook.
So what are some of your other fun and useful applications of AI these days?
Yeah, I started researching AI about a year ago. In fact, I sort of unplugged from work almost all this year to really focus on it and how to leverage it. And I do use it in very interesting personal ways. Like one of my favorite examples is I used to travel a lot. So I've worked in 15 countries. I've traveled all over the world. So packing is always like a complicated situation, right? You have to figure out what the weather, where you're going, the activities, and you have all these clothes, and I have several bags that I could use. So one of the first personal things I did was I basically gave ChatGPT my entire list of clothing, my entire list of everything that I would ever take from the bathroom on a travel, and then all of my luggage. And then I've also been an amateur photographer. So all of my photography equipment, all of my electronics that I would ever take, I just gave it an entire laundry list. And then in March, I was going to Alaska. I just randomly decided to go up to Alaska and see a friend of mine. And so I was like, well, I've never been to Alaska. I have no idea what I'm going to need to go up to Alaska. So I basically, after I gave it that whole list, I said, I'm going to Alaska at this time of year. These are the activities I'm doing. Like I did some dog sledding on the Iditarod Trail and some other things. And I said, what should I bring? And it was shocking because not only did it give me all of the clothes I should bring and everything else, but it gave me a list of things I didn't have that I would need.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah.
And if you were going to a foreign country, would it tell you what kind of vaccinations you might need?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think if you get into the AI, and it's it was in what they call a walled garden for a long time, which means they downloaded a lot of data to make it smart. But when you used it, like early ChatGPT, it didn't go out to the internet. So all of its data only went up to September of 2021. So you had to operate within that. But for tasks like that, you don't need like necessarily current data. If you're doing things like marketing strategies or business strategies, or you're trying to do some research, you want something that's more current. But for activities like that, it was great. And in this book I recently wrote, I talk about like when you're doing online dating profiles, right? Like the hard thing about online dating profiles is people are not marketers, right? They don't know how to do marketing. They're not photographers, and they have to just kind of figure it out, right? And so they write these things that don't make them sound interesting, and maybe they are. So one of the things I encourage people to do is to take your bio and take all of your thoughts and your list and things that you want to convey in your profile and let AI write the profile for you. Now,
and which app do you like to do that? We're talking about ChatGPT or Jasper.
I go back and forth between Claude and ChatGPT. I left
Claude with a C or with a K?
With a C. It's Claude.ai. It's Anthropic's AI, and it was, for me, it was at the time it was way better than ChatGPT because you could upload documents to it before they had the upgrade at ChatGPT, and it could look at live URLs. So some of my work is to do research. So I do like competitive research. Like I was researching this private jet service and was looking at the competitors, and I wanted to know like what advantages they had over my client and what my client had over them. And so I had to analyze all their websites and give me research. Which normally would have taken me hours and hours and hours to conduct and to write out and synthesize. And it just did it all like in 20 seconds.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's pretty wild.
So we're about to wrap up. You mentioned one other topic, which our listeners love hearing about, both single and married people, which is the whole notion of online dating, which we've talked a lot about on the show and we'll be talking more about in weeks and months to come. But tell the audience about your book and why you wrote it.
Sure. It's the book is called Return to Dating. You can Google it search for it on Amazon, and it just went into the bookstore like a couple days ago. But I wrote the book because I have been single on and off since 2008, since I've gotten divorced. I went through the early period when it was just Match and it was really rough, and all the way to the evolution of where it is today with Tinder and Bumble and Hinge. And one of the things I recognized, because I had been on so many first dates with a lot of people who were my age, and almost all of them had just come off of divorces. Like they had been in long-term marriages, they had raised kids, and find themselves being single for the first time in your 40s or 50s. And the last time was maybe when you were in your 20s. And so obviously everything has changed. You have things like love languages, attachment styles. You have all of these things like ghosting and love bombing, and people hear that and they just become overwhelmed with all of those things. So I wrote this very practical guide that sort of walks you through returning to dating and how to do online dating, how to create a profile, how to be authentic, how for women to be very safe and make sure that they're staying away from things like red flags. And so it's a pretty comprehensive guide. It's not a big read. You could probably read it in like an hour and a half, but my hopes is that people will read it, get familiar with it, and then when they're in those situations, they can come back and refer to it.
Yeah, and that's a great example of where technology, if properly used, can potentially help you meet your love match. So
absolutely,
it's a great example. You know, I always say this about technology. If it doesn't make you smarter, make your job easier, make you happy, bring you joy, then what the hell are you doing with it?
Yeah, those have
Technology
literally
should
been the pillars of my career for the last 20
Yeah,
years.
it should be an enabler. It should or help you make money. It should be an enabler as opposed to a detractor.
Right.
So just to wrap up, what are the 3 favorite apps that you currently have on your phone?
You mean for dating?
No, for anything.
Oh, for
Like,
anything.
if you had to, the old story of if your house was on fire and you could only bring one thing, what would you bring? If your phone was about to crash and you could only salvage 3 apps. We're not talking about zombie apocalypse. We're talking about just in your day-to-day life, what couldn't you live without?
I would say I have the ChatGPT app, and I'm starting to use it again more. So I like having that sort of easy access because it's really the only one that has like an app that you can just get into, and it's feels pretty reliable. I love TikTok. I'm on TikTok all the time, which sounds crazy for someone my age. But when you understand that there are more people who now search on TikTok than on Google, you understand there's a lot of amazing content on there, and it's not just teenagers dancing. Once you start liking things, you follow hashtags, you start getting things I'm interested in, like technology, innovation, politics. All of the things that I'm super curious about are always in my feed. So it's done a really good job of delivering content that I need. The third one, it's probably just my messages app because I feel like it's it's probably how I communicate with people 70% of the time. Is through texting. So I think that's about it.
Well, thank you. That's a tough question. As I was asking it, I'm thinking, I don't know that I could narrow it down to 3. I mean, I have 3 in my personal life and I have 3 in my professional life. Professionally, I probably could not live without Canva and Google Docs.
Oh, yeah. I love Canva. And I was going to mention one of the reasons I switched, I was a very big Adobe products person. I used all their products, but now I primarily use Canva for a lot of things I never expected to use it for, like brand identity design, a lot of things that I would have only thought that it was more of a layout, but it's starting to pick up tools that are more like Photoshop, more like Illustrator. And one of the reasons I really love switching it is I do a lot of pitch decks for startups. And so I do them in Canva now because I can share them with the people I'm working with. They can make edits on the fly, and we can make edits on the fly, and you can do it on your phone. Right. And you could even present on your phone, and it's all cloud-based. So there's no complexity anymore.
Exactly. And even if you're not working and you're not a graphic designer or a writer or a marketer, apps like Canva just have all kinds of day-to-day practical application. I just finished planning a baby shower for my younger daughter. I'm time-strapped. I'm busy. I have other stuff going on. I designed it in Canva. I uploaded it to Evite. I was able to keep track of who had RSVP'd, who hadn't. I used it sort of to, again, sort of applying my marketing skills to my personal life, was able to take the theme all the way through the decor. And so it really can have applications. And now I also have this list of all of my daughter's friends, which has been automated. She uploaded her registry. So when I think about how much time and energy it saved me in party planning, where, contrasting that to 1974, where I was the party planner whenever my parents would go out of town, that my parents are no longer around, because otherwise they would go, what? Nancy was throwing parties in our house? But everything is just simpler, faster, easier. And the example I was using before about digitizing all of my family photos, that's priceless, because relatives now who live clear across the country are able to see pictures of their great-great-grandparents, which in the past, that just wouldn't have been easily accessible. So that's another good example of how technology can actually build relationships and
I think it can help remove
together.
Isolation, right? Like I remember even my mom and dad, when they got older, they sort of started isolating, but they were still able to keep in touch with people, right? Because of technology. They were able to see pictures. Like when I was traveling around the world, I was able to send them pictures of where I was from because I had a phone that I could take a picture and just literally text it to them. So it was, I would say, I don't know that before that, because I would say all that happened later in their lives, that there was a period probably 10 years before that where we weren't nearly as much in touch, right?
No, and I think the pandemic really, almost too much so, but I do think it accelerated a lot of relationship building digitally, that in the past people either would have stayed at home and just not talked to anybody, which I'm sure some people still did, or they were very out and about and social.
Right.
And during the pandemic, I went to a nonprofit fundraiser with Ron Howard, formerly Opie,
Wow. Right.
and now major filmmaker, and he was the presenter on Zoom.
Oh, wow, very cool.
So I've been able to connect with people through digital media that I probably would never have connected with in the real world. So I think,
sure.
Our listeners, as they think about technology, do not think of it as the devil's work. Think about it as something that could really make your life better and easier and save you time and connect you with new people and stave off loneliness in later years. So how can people get in touch with you, Jack, if they want to follow up with you? I know you mentioned your book is now available on Amazon. What are the other best ways for people to reach you?
You can go to my website. It's jackskates.com, just like roller skates. There's information about me there. There's links to my LinkedIn. I don't know that there's a link to the book on there yet, but like I said, we just went up a couple days ago, and I wrote it under the pen name Hayden Sky, in case you're confused and you don't see my name on there. And that's mainly because there are some references and stories in the book, and I just sort of wanted to preserve the anonymity of the people who were part of those stories.
I appreciate that. We were also, that was something I worried about when I launched the podcast, is keeping my business life and my personal life separate enough that
Right.
it's not either embarrassing or...
Well, I was lucky. I had 3 people that I actually had been on dates with that I became really good friends with who helped contribute. When I first drafted it, I sent it to them and I said, am I crazy? Is this lame? And they were like, no, this is great, but you need to include these things. You forgot this.
Yeah, some of my best friends
Yeah.
I've met on dating apps, and even though it was no love match, we just found that we had a lot in common. And
Yeah, some of my
stayed in touch
closest
with-
friends I've met on online dating for sure.
Yeah, and so I sometimes think that online dating is not really fully leveraging its power in terms of creating friendships. I know Bumble has Bumble Friends, and I've ended up doing work with people I've met on the dating apps. So I do think that the whole notion of connecting with random strangers through technology is one that really does cross the digital divide, and it can humanize us in the long run. So thank you again, Jack, for being on the podcast. Please subscribe. It is called The Geezerproofer. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, wherever you happen to get your podcast. I also do have a YouTube channel. So if you're a visual person, you can actually watch us talking into our microphones. I know that's kind of thrilling. But please be sure to listen. We have lots of great guests coming up. And remember, don't be a geezer, be a beezer, be a badass after 50. Thanks for listening. Peace out.